Barnes & Noble Audio.
I think we're not good at the world changing. The world has changed very fast in the last 10 or 20 years, and we have a lot of new tools. Like on the order of like the first 200 years of the printing press happened in 10 or 20 years. I don't think we know what we're doing.
I'm Miwa Messer from Barnes & Noble. Hank Green is the CEO of Complexly, a production company that creates educational content, including Crash Course and SciShow, and his company's videos have been viewed more than 2 billion times on YouTube. He's also one half of YouTube's Vlog Brothers, followed by more than 3 million viewers. Then there's VidCon, the world's largest conference about online videos. There's the environmental technology blog EcoGeek, the annual charity fundraiser Project for Awesome, the online video production company Pemberley Digital, which produces video blog adaptations of classic novels in the public domain. And then there are the podcasts, Dear Hank and John and Delete This. And Hank's also a musician with 5 albums released thus far. So that's the SparkNotes version of Hank Green's CV. So knowing all that, 2 things come to mind. 1, Hank Green might not actually sleep, ever. And 2, story is Hank Green's business. Think about it for a minute. The videos and video blogs, the cons, the web series, the crowdfunding, the games, the songs, and podcasts, they're all just different ways that Hank Green uses to tell stories, educate audiences, and build community. And now there's a novel. Hank's debut is a crackerjack of a story so wildly great and fun and thought-provoking that it was an obvious pick for the Barnes & Noble Book Club. An Absolutely Remarkable Thing is in stores September 25th in a Barnes & Noble Book Club edition that features an original essay that takes readers behind the scenes of the novel, along with a reading group guide. Hank joins us in the studio today to talk about fame and the internet and growing up, and maybe a giant alien robot or two. So thanks for joining us, Hank.
That was really hard to listen to and not say anything. You're very sweet.
You're the one who did it all. I just had to read it. Okay, maybe I wrote it a little bit, but not that much. So here's the thing. An Absolutely Remarkable Thing is just out. And I have a sneaking suspicion other readers will be doing what I did, which is sit down, devour it in one go. And yes, I know it took you 5 years to read. And really, it's a bizarre compliment to say,
right.
You know, I know this took you a very long time to do, but I did not want to leave this world you've created. So can you do me a favor, and would you set up the story for readers who haven't met April May or Andy or Maya, Miranda,
Sure.
Robin, and don't forget Carl.
So April is a recent art student graduate in New York City. She's trying to make it work in New York, which is not the easiest thing to do as a 23-year-old. And she's living with her girlfriend, Maya, and is on the way home from her job that she does not like very much late at night and stumbles across this giant, peculiar statue, which she thinks is probably some kind of interesting art installation, and makes a video with it. And then it turns out that was a more complicated story than she thought. And her friend Andy and her find themselves in control of a narrative that they didn't think they were going to be in control of, but also desperate to keep control of it. And find out a lot about how media works, how fame works, how power works, and also a lot about themselves and their own, both the good parts about themselves and also some bad stuff.
Where did this novel start for you? How did this novel start?
It literally is a dream. So a very sort of pivotal moment in the book. One of the weirdest and also sort of globally important moments was a weird dream I had about a robot who had a very unpleasant interaction with another person. And I was like, that's great. And I found that the process of writing a book is a little bit, you have ideas for wonderful moments, and then you have to figure out how to connect them together with a story that makes sense. And it's very similar to songwriting for me, where like I come up with a very good line, and I'm like, well, that has to be in a song, and so I guess I have to write the song around that line. And then you create other lines that might be even better than that original line you were building around. But you have that seed, and it has to grow from there. And sometimes the seed is in the beginning, and sometimes it's at the end of the song or the story. And for me, this was a very sort of like middle point in the story, and I started writing around it. And it took a sort of a lot of different tries, different forms. And originally that was a graphic novel that I wanted to write. And the first half of the book took place in like 4 pages of graphic novel. And then I realized that a lot of what was most interesting about this was my own experience with fame and with, the sort of responsibility that comes along with that, and the pressure, but also the expectation and the obligation of that. And also watching some of my friends who were younger people who, when they first were in sort of like became notable in the public eye, and how they, sometimes handled that well and how they sometimes handled that poorly.
I'd really like to talk about your protagonist for a minute.
Okay.
Because April May's voice is terrific. It's absolutely terrific. She's prickly. She's self-absorbed. She's young. She's very book smart.
Yeah.
She's also a girl with a black girlfriend. So can we talk about sensitivity reads for a second?
Sure,
We are in that era.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I mean, you are a white guy from Missoula.
Yeah, kind
Do
of.
tell.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely writing outside of your experience is, it's somewhat fraught and you have to be careful. But I also think that it can't be avoided. Like I can't tell a story of just a bunch of white guys from Montana.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I could. I guess some people do that. My friend groups are often majority female.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how that has ended up being a case for me, but also I definitely like walking into that, and Maya being an important character in the book, and her being, black and gay, and April being bisexual, all things that I wanted people who had closer experiences with being those things in America to read this book and tell me things I got wrong, stupid things like what kind of shampoo Maya would use, but also important things like when Maya's talking about being black in America, does that ring true? Does tell me about that from your perspective, and how would being thrust into the public eye when you have this other piece of your identity where people are going to be sort of latching onto that because it's the one thing about you that isn't sort of fit into the box. How does that affect how you are perceived by the world? And so I had a lot of good friends and also people I didn't know that well who were able to look through this and even from the perspective of just a woman, give me a little bit of how wrong am I, and let's work through that. And it's a process, but it's really rewarding too, because you get to talk to smart people about, and sharing their perspectives.
Well, and when you announced the book on your vlog, you started with, well, I had a character and then I had some scenes and I wanted to link it all together. But then I also realized I knew a lot about certain things. No, I think this is really interesting that you sort of needed to give yourself permission in a way to say, hey, wait a minute, I know a lot about this very weird thing that lots of people don't know about. More importantly, though, when did you realize how much of the book was going to become this criticism of the media business, of fame, of power? I mean, there is a lot of very, very smart commentary in here. You've got 5 tiers of fame and the mechanics of fame and publishing. My note says to me, publishing at the speed of light and what that means and what it does for power. This is not your average novel about extraordinary events.
I think it's safe to say that there's a lot of first contact stories in the world. That's not too much of a spoiler.
Okay.
And for me, it's a lens. It's always a lens. And so to me, I wanted to be really open to that and be really honest about it. And ultimately, when it was what do I want to tell a story about? When we have big news, how do we treat it? What do we treat it like? And it's very interesting to spend a little time analyzing that and find out that maybe it isn't about thoughtful understanding. It's about how do I talk about the thing that I want to talk about through that, and also how slow we can be to adapt to new information.
What do you mean by that?
I think we're not good at the world changing. The world has changed very fast in the last 10 or 20 years, and we have a lot of new tools. On the order of the first 200 years of the printing press happened in
Yeah.
10 or 20 years. And that shift, I don't think that we're good at it yet. I don't think we know what we're doing. I think that we're, John and I made a joke once that we're a little bit like aardvarks with guns. And we're like, I don't really know how to do this, but when I shoot it, it makes a really loud noise. And I like that, but my friend just died. And I don't really understand how my friend died, but I did enjoy the noise that it made. So you're liking a thing, and you're not tying it to the negative consequence yet,
Right.
because it's too indirect. And I think that is also the case, like, whenever there's any big shift. Like, we continue walking down the paths we've always walked down. They're well trod, and finding a new path, it takes time. We're a river. Like cultural consciousness is a river, and cutting a new path, even if it's a more direct path to the sea, is just going to take thousands of years for that meander to change. And I don't think that we're that slow, but I think we're slow. And I was well aware of that going into this, that like certain people would be like, I understand where we're going, but most people would be like, well, I guess, because a lot of times in First Contact, you end up in a place where it's like, the whole world went mad. There's riots in this street. I don't think, doesn't make any sense to me. I think we'd be like, well, I guess I still need to get macaroni and cheese though. But my hangnail still hurts. Yeah. And some people would identify ways to basically figure out how to profit off of it, either monetarily or in terms of gaining attention. But most people would just sort of initially be like, well, that's some news I have to deal with, I guess. But, I've heard a lot of news lately.
You have this great line in the book. Humans are terrible at believing reality.
It's very true.
Oh, wow. I mean, you've got all of these lines. I could quote all of these lines back at you. But again, I'm worried about revealing spoilers. But they're all of these terrific lines of dialogue. Dialogue can be tricky. You know this. You've written plenty of video scripts for yourself and other people.
Uh-huh.
How did you figure out what your characters needed to sound like?
I don't know. Like creating a character to me ended up being, and I don't know any other way to do it. I'm fairly new to this, to be frank. I don't know any other way to create a character than to take me and then to dial certain things up and certain things down. And, like a lot of Andy's like fanboy enthusiasm is mine, but so is and then there's like this sort of like dichotomy of different people who are into science. There's like people who are super into science because they see it as like sort of a philosophical lens through which to understand things, and then people who are super into science because they want to understand the world in fundamental ways. And Andy is that first kind where he's like, yeah, I'm into science. I like sciencey stuff. Like I like science fiction, and then Miranda is more like, yeah, I mean, like, it's not really a philosophy. It's not an ideology. Right. It's just like, it's a process through which we figure things out. And so like, that's just two sides of my enthusiasm for science. And then like April is my ambition stripped of all of its controls. And I know that if I like let my ambition free, how dangerous it would be. And I work hard to not let it out, honestly. And I think that my wife appreciates that.
Your wife, who is on your podcast.
Yeah.
Delete this.
Yeah, where we analyze my Twitter feed, and she tells me whether or not I've made gigantic mistakes.
And I bring that up because that's a big part of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
In an absolutely remarkable thing. It's the power that we give into social media. The power that we've given to voices that maybe yell louder than some others. I mean, you frequently say in this book, don't read the comments. You have characters saying to each other, don't read the comments. Yeah. And I think many of us agree with that. Don't read the comments.
You got to read the comments, though.
I know. I can't stop doing it.
That's the only feedback.
I can't stop
I'm terrified of book reviews, man. You go ahead and tell me what you think on everywhere, Goodreads and whatever, but like, oh, God, I'm going to read those things so hard and I'm going to feel real hurt. But you do it anyway. I care a lot about what people think about me. April also says one of my favorite insights of hers, because it's weird to assign an insight to someone who is not me, but I created them, but was that hate and fear are the best fuels. And I think that the social internet, like, I think when you sort of like, when you're measuring how much time people are spending on a platform, you're trying to optimize for that. You're trying to optimize for engagement and how much they share and how much they interact with a piece of content. You find that. And I think activists have known this for a long time. And like, I'm not saying that because hate is, you know, just because it's like, it can be maybe a bad fuel, it doesn't mean that it can't be used. I think that we do need ways to get people up and to work and to fight for the world being a better place, and you sometimes want to use whatever fuel you have access to. But I think that fear and hatred can be a long-burning fuel that keeps you active, but I don't think that it ever converts to anything else. I think it's a very difficult fuel to convert to something else, and so I think you sort of end up stuck in that. And April's transition to a more nuanced view of her situation is slow, and maybe it doesn't even happen because of that.
What do you want readers to know about an absolutely remarkable thing? Like, what's the thing that makes your heart go pitter-patter when you're talking about this book?
Honestly, like, I want people to know that it's fun. Like, we're talking a lot about the themes, but like, I love these characters. Like, none of them are bad people.
Well, okay, even the couple of people who have questionable behavior, they don't actually think they're bad guys.
Right, exactly.
They do believe their point of view, and that is legitimate.
Right.
Now, I don't happen to agree with either of them, but their point of view is legitimate, and it's not like you're trying to say that their opinion is not valid. It's not that. But you need stuff to happen in order for the story to move forward.
Right.
You have to bump up against something.
But I did, like, I'm really over anti-heroes. I just am so sick of bad people, and people who anyway, I don't need to go into that. But I did want this to be a group of friends who are like, who like each other, who care about each other, who are in an adventure together, who do amazing things together, and like really achieve amazing things. And like it's, that's, I wanted to create a book that, gives you a new perspective. Helps you understand how like weird the world that I have inhabited for a while is, and how much of a mixed bag. We say power, we say fame, but I think that the word that we should be using is power.
Okay, why do you say that?
There's literally a word that has come to define people who have my job, people who are professional social media people. That, and I hate this word, but it is caught on, and it's the word now, influencer. And so you say this about people who are makeup gurus, and you say it about people who make videos about physics. They're influencers. And I'm like, what is that except saying you are a power broker? You are a person who controls other people. And you do it for a fee to some extent. Like, it's not the only reason you do it. You also do it for good. But like, if for our science show, like, we take money in order to tell people about a new product. This mattress will show up at your house, and we promise it's really great. And so like, there's that, but then there's more insidious ways that sometimes it happens. It's kind of hidden, and people don't really know that the influence is happening to them, which is very weird, and also against some FCC regulations. But there's a lot of people out there. It's a lot easier to avoid scrutiny these days. And and I think that we all underestimate the amount of power that we have over each other, but just by virtue of being, Americans with access to the internet and hot water flowing out of our pipes and like all of these luxuries that we have that we don't think about anymore. I think that we, and by virtue of like kind of controlling what our peers see. Like, when I post something on Facebook, it doesn't seem like an act of power, but I am now the editor of my social group's newsroom, I'm in charge of what they see, and that doesn't feel like an onus that's been placed on me, but it is. And that's another example of us not being great at adjusting to the world working in a new way.
How did the story unfold for you?
I felt that the best writing happened, well, I don't think that it was something that I could rush necessarily. But if I sat down and started to type, good things would happen. And if I had an idea of where I wanted to get to, I was kind of surprised by how easy it was to get there. Like before I sat down at the computer, I would feel like, I have no idea how I'm going to connect these two scenes together. And then I'd be like, oh, I did it. And it was like an hour later and it happened. But I also feel like that I took a long time to write this, and that was good because it gave me a lot of moments to just sit and be like for a week, like, I'm not writing this book, I'm just thinking about it. Like, where do we want to end up? What do I want to say? What is the problem that I have, like a plot problem, and just like work through that until it worked again. But boy, I did not realize the extent to which writing a book is solving plot problems. Just like, I want these two things to happen, and I want them to get to this place, but they're in this other place, and they're not and then this person's over here, and so we have to get them in the same place together, and there has to be a logical reason for that to happen. Oh, this'll work.
Says the guy who's written a novel full of fun puzzles.
Yeah,
I mean, and I'm really trying not to give anything away, but there's layer upon layer upon layer of puzzle in this book, and people really do have to come together as a community to solve it, and that's a really big part of the storyline as well, is that no one, including April May, who, of course, she learns the hard way, she's really walking into walls, no one can do this on their own.
Yeah.
And it's kind of delightful to see them figure this out.
And that's one of the big things that I believe and was glad I could find a way to fit into a story, is that like we are so hyper individualistic in this country, especially like America is very like every person for themselves, and every person, like all great things are done by one man usually. And that's not how it works. There's always huge teams of people. And I remember as a kid being like, who invented the TV? And then we've kind of invented a guy who invented the TV at this point. Of course, he made tremendous contributions to the creation of the TV, but like it was a lot of people who worked together to make all the different parts of the TV and the beaming of it through radio transmissions. And yeah, so there's a lot of things that go into the creation of any invention now. And you know, you look at your phone and it's like, Steve Jobs did that. My butt, Steve Jobs did that. Like a lot, bust that thing open. Nobody knows how all of the pieces in your phone work. Not a single person in the world knows how a phone works. You have to get a lot of people together to know how every part of it works. It's not like there are people who know how every part works, but no one person who knows how all of it works, which is great. And I think that it's kind of a destructive way of seeing the world, and to some extent, a tremendous amount of pressure to put on young people to be that kind of exceptional. And when it's a lie, like it's just not a thing that happens. And it's also a lie that I think that some people can end up telling to themselves, that like, I did this. But really what you did is you paid some people to help you do it.
Did you know how this book was going to end?
No.
So you were just as surprised as anyone who's
I thought
going to
it was going to end very differently.
Okay.
Yeah.
For me, the ending was super organic. It felt entirely inevitable.
I know.
It was the only way it was going to go. And at the same time, I was like, what was it like?
But was it
this
surprising,
ending?
though? I don't want people to come into it thinking like, oh, that's the only way that it could have ended. That's exactly what I expected. I didn't expect it.
For me, organic and inevitable is actually a compliment. Like, it just felt like this is the thing that you had to do.
Right. There's I wanted to do it so bad, and I'm amazed that I did it, that I love so much in books, where you have no idea how a book is going to end, and then it ends, and you're like, yes.
Yes.
That makes so much sense.
That would describe most of my response, yes.
Yeah, and I didn't think I'd be able to pull it off, and then I was like, "Oh God!"
Oh, no, you totally did.
It's happening.
Totally
it's like
did.
as soon as I had two ideas simultaneously, and I was like, "Shit, this!" Oh, it was very exciting. And this book, it's crazy how much it makes me cry through the book. Like when these big things happen to these poor kids, and I've read this scene, I don't know, 12 times now, and it still makes me cry.
Yes, but
What's wrong with me?
Reading fiction helps grow your empathy muscles. That's part of it.
I think mine are too big. Ever since I had a baby, I got real big empathy muscles now.
Oh,
Crying at everything.
I've heard that happens. Who's your audience?
Oh, God, I hope everybody. There's a lot of the F word in it, so maybe it doesn't go too young. But yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a science fiction story, so I really hope it reaches into that world. I love science fiction so much. That's my sort of like comfort food in terms of books, and what I go back to over and over again, and never am disappointed by great science fiction. So I hope it reaches into that world. I think that it primarily isn't, though. Like, it isn't, obviously, like, it has elements of science fiction, but there's no world built. It takes place now-ish. It takes place in the near future, and all technology is roughly the same. And so what I hope is that it's people who take their interaction and effect on the world seriously as the audience for this book.
What's the first thing you look for in a story when you're reading?
Character. Yeah, good people that are fleshed out and feel real, and that I start to care about because they make interesting decisions that aren't inevitable. That, like, they make a choice that's like, oh, that's an interesting choice.
Was there anything that really surprised you while you were writing an absolutely remarkable thing?
I think a lot of the decisions that people end up making. Like, there's a moment very early in the book where Andy makes, and this is like when I sort of knew the direction it was heading in, but like the sort of trajectory that the story would have taken would have been so very different if Andy hadn't making what kind of looks like a selfless choice in the end. And it really was. And that's
we're talking about the very first video, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, I like that character so much, and I identify so much with him. And
he's a good guy. He's a good guy and a good friend, and he really wants to figure out the world. And his dad may or may not be as helpful as his dad wants to be. But parents are well-intentioned. They're very well-intentioned people.
Yeah. I think once you put the people together in the space, none of them make decisions that end up surprising me individually, but like the outcome is like, oh, we have to go here now because we can't do anything else. Like none of you would allow a different path.
You had a great line on one of your vlogs where you described words on the page as virtual reality, where the world around you would just collapse. And disappear because you were so into the book. And around these parts, we call that a full body read, where you end up talking about fictional characters like they're real, like they're going to walk in the door. When you're a bookseller, that's not weird behavior. That's just Tuesday.
Yeah.
All of your characters are very well intentioned. It's just that they really do think they control the world more than they do.
Yeah. And I think that's true of all.
Absolutely.
I think it's a not uncommon. Yep.
One of the most human things there is.
Yeah, and I struggle with that all the time where I'm like, let's do this. And John will be like, Hank, you cannot, you do not have the power to do that. You are not.
Is he older?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That explains it. There's been a lot of, John said no. I was like, he must be older.
Yeah. He's also just a lot less, I don't know. I tend to have a lot of confidence. That
baby brother thing.
is sometimes earned and sometimes unearned.
What have you learned over the years from your viewers and your listeners and the people you've met at your events or VidCon or?
That's a big question.
I know it's a big question, but I figured you could answer part of it.
A lot of different things. I mean, when you have a large audience, a lot of what you're doing is creating yourself in their eyes. And one of the things that I think anybody who's in that position learns is that as you're doing that, you're not just sort of building your authentic brand and creating a consistency that people will see as like, this is who that person is. In doing that, you're changing who you are. Like, you become a different person. And there's a sort of like dystopian fear to the idea that at any moment I could be watched by someone who could like knows who I am. And if they see me doing something like really crappy, they could tweet about it or just like, or that it would disillusion them and make them feel really unhappy and bad about how much time they spent consuming and enjoying not just the media, but the sort of ideology or the vision of what we try to do on the internet. And I don't find that to be a scary thing. I find it to be an extremely valuable tool. That like, I have decided to expect a certain thing of myself. And I also feel a little bit like I've got some panopticon policing going on where at any moment, if there's people around, they might be a fan and they might be really disillusioned and sad if I'm bad. And so maybe I give a little bit higher tips because of that.
You said you wanted people to read a book that you'd written because of the impact books had had on you. Not so much you wanted to write a book, but you wanted people to share an experience, which I think is a very cool way of describing a writer's job. So what were those books for you? What were the books that made the world disappear, the books that made you say, you know what, I want someone to have this experience too?
I think the first one was probably Jurassic Park. As a kid, and just, I don't know how, I probably was 13, 14 years old, and that, in terms of a novel, and that book just seemed like that adventure seemed so real to me, and the science seemed so real to me.
Right.
I was very nerdy.
Who wouldn't want to see a dinosaur walk down the street?
I mean, and it was, oh God. I still remember like the spine tingling moments of that book where it's just like, oh, it's bigger than we think it is. And like Anyway. And I read a lot of Michael Crichton. And then I think Dune was a big one for me. I think Ender's Game, Hyperion makes you live in that world so much. It's a lot of science fiction, you guys. And then the first time I sort of like realized that science fiction was about people was Kim Stanley Robinson's Mars Trilogy.
Right.
That science fiction it's about people in an exceptional circumstance. It's not about the exceptional circumstance itself. And it's such like a dry, kind of boring way to talk about, like, it's so political and interpersonal, and the Mars Trilogy is, it's not an adventure story. There's adventure, but it's politics. It's science. It's geology. There's a lot of geology in those books, and and that immersed me in a way that had never happened to me before, and I continue to go back to those books, and they really helped me understand my own ambition.
Ambition as a writer?
No, ambition as a human.
Interesting.
Because
okay.
all of the people in that book are very ambitious because, of course, how else do you get to be one of the first people on Mars?
True.
And whether ambition exists in a vacuum or whether it exists for a purpose. And I think that it can be either way.
Thank you, Hank Green, for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks a lot. This is really fun.
Thanks for listening to our conversation with Hank Green. To learn more about An Absolutely Remarkable Thing, go to barnesandnoble.com/podcast. We've got more amazing guests coming up on the Barnes & Noble podcast, so to make sure that you don't miss out, subscribe to the B&N Podcast in Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. Today's interview was conducted by Miwa Messer. This episode was produced by Bill Tipper, with editing and engineering from Josh Barillo.
Barnes & Noble Audio.